Jazmin Rockwood lived a life that most people prayed for, yet she carried it like a sentence. Her husband, David, was a man of quiet rhythms and steady devotion. A mid-level accountant by trade, he spoke the language of security fluently. His love showed up in spreadsheets, retirement projections, and late evenings at the kitchen table of their cozy Tudor home, moving numbers across a glowing screen to make sure their forever was protected. "We're doing really well, Jazzy," he'd say, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "If we keep this pace, we'll have the house paid off early. We can finally take that trip to the mountains." Jazmin would smile. She always did. But behind her eyes, something screamed. The mountains? She wanted the French Riviera. She didn't want pine trees and quiet mornings. She wanted ocean views from a glass-walled penthouse, the kind that looked down on the city like it belonged to her. She was tired of the charming creak of old floorboards and the comfort of a home that felt too small for her ambition. Jazmin was a senior marketing executive, someone who spent her days crafting desire, selling aspiration, building brands that promised more. She lived in a world of polished visuals and high-stakes impressions, only to come home to a life that felt generic. Budget-friendly wine, sensibly planned purchases, a wardrobe chosen for practicality instead of presence. She didn't just want to wear designer labels, she wanted to be the lifestyle. And the quiet, careful life David was building, solid, loving, responsible, felt less like security to her now, and more like a ceiling she was desperate to break through. He didn't enter rooms, he claimed them, not with volume or arrogance, but with an ease that bent attention toward him without effort. His wealth was the quiet kind, the kind that didn't announce itself because it never had to. Old money, patient money, the kind that watched instead of chased. Alonzo ran a private equity firm that managed what he called legacy wealth. Families whose names never appeared in headlines, whose power moved silently behind closed doors. He was handsome, yes, but it wasn't his face that lingered. It was his stillness. The way he listened without reacting. The way he spoke as if every word had already been weighed and approved. A predator in a bespoke suit, calm, controlled, and always 10 steps ahead. Jazmin was assigned to his account for a massive rebranding initiative, a project big enough to fast-track anyone smart enough to handle it. From their very first meeting, Alonzo noticed something most people missed. Her hunger, not desperation, ambition, the kind that had outgrown its environment. He didn't ask about ROI or target demographics. He didn't talk campaigns or deliverables. Instead, he studied her the way investors studied markets, looking for unrealized value. Their first dinner was framed as business. The scotch alone cost more than David's monthly car payment. "You have a gift, Jazmin," Alonzo said, his voice smooth, measured, "but you're playing in the shallow end." She smiled politely, unsure if this was flattery or a test. He leaned back, unbothered by silence. "You belong where the water is deep," he continued, "where decisions shape lives, where power isn't borrowed, it's owned." Then, almost casually, he asked the question that settled in her chest like a spark. "Why are you settling for a life that's so careful?" The word lingered. Careful. Jazmin felt it immediately, the contrast between the world she came from and the one he was offering. The difference between stability and significance, between budgeting and commanding. Alonzo didn't touch her, didn't flirt, didn't push. He didn't have to. He simply opened a door and let her imagine herself on the other side. The late nights became Jazmin's new normal. They started as necessary, strategic, temporary. She told David the Sims account was demanding, global timelines, high expectations, an opportunity too important to mishandle. He nodded, kissed her forehead, reheated leftovers alone. At first, she dressed for confidence. Then she started dressing for Alonzo. Not consciously, not in a way she'd admit, but with intention all the same. The cuts were sharper, the heels higher, the colors bolder. When the $3,000 blazer appeared on her company card, she didn't flinch. An investment, she told herself. This account requires presence. Business dinners blurred into something else. Long, wine-soaked nights where Alonzo spoke less about branding and more about belonging, about access, about the difference between people who managed wealth and those who commanded it. He never insulted David directly. He didn't need to. He simply framed him as small. "Some men are built for structure," Alonzo said once, swirling his glass. "Others are built for expansion." He looked at Jazmin then, really looked. "You're not meant to live a contained life." Each word loosened something in her. David's careful budgeting began to feel like limitation. His stability felt like inertia. His love, once grounding, now felt like gravity holding her back from the version of herself Alonzo kept reflecting. She told herself she deserved more, not out of greed, but out of recognition. When the affair began, it didn't feel reckless. It felt earned. She didn't feel guilty. She felt chosen, validated, elevated. Alonzo promised her nothing outright, and yet implied everything. International galas, private jets, a seat beside him in rooms where decisions shaped markets and lives. She imagined herself there effortlessly, as if she had always belonged. What she didn't notice, or refused to, was the silence. The one subject Alonzo never volunteered. He spoke of empires, of influence, of freedom, but never of home. The adrenaline of the double life didn't last. It never does. Eventually, the thrill thinned out, leaving only impatience behind. One evening, Jazmin walked into the cozy home she had once called a blessing. The soft lighting, the familiar creak of the floors. David was at the kitchen table, reviewing numbers the way he always did. Steady, focused, predictable. She looked at him and felt nothing. Not anger, not sadness, just irritation. "I want a divorce," she said, her voice flat, practiced. "I've outgrown this life. I've outgrown you." David blinked, as if the words needed time to register. "What?" he asked quietly. "This," she said, gesturing around them. "The budgets, the caution, the small thinking. I'm done pretending this is enough." She expected tears, resistance, maybe a fight. Instead, David just stared at her, not with rage, but with something far worse: disappointment. She left that night believing she was finally choosing herself. She expected to run straight into Alonzo's world, into open doors, penthouse views, validation. But when she walked into Alonzo's office the next morning, glowing with what she thought was freedom, the temperature shifted instantly. No smile, no warmth, no intimacy. Alonzo sat behind his desk, composed, distant, looking at her not as a woman he desired, but as a problem. "Jazmin," he said calmly, folding his hands. "You've made a mistake." Her smile faltered. "I have a family," he continued. "A wife who is essential to my social standing. 2 children who are the heirs to my firm." He paused, not unkindly, but without mercy. "You were a brilliant strategist, and we had a pleasant distraction. But I don't do scandal. It's bad for the bottom line." The words landed slowly, deliberately. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He simply closed the door she thought she had earned. By the next day, it was done. To protect himself, Alonzo moved his entire account to a rival firm, citing unprofessional conduct and boundary violations. Her name was attached to the fallout, not his. He didn't just leave her, he erased her. And for the first time since this began, Jazmin understood the truth. She hadn't been chosen, she had been used. Here's the moment when her life changed forever. The fall didn't happen gradually. It came like a landslide, too fast to outrun, too heavy to stop. The marriage. David, the man Jazmin had dismissed as careful and predictable, had been paying attention. The same precision he applied to spreadsheets, he applied to the truth. He tracked everything, every late meeting, every unexplained charge, every hotel stay disguised as business travel. He didn't confront her with emotion. He confronted her with facts. In the divorce, David was exact, surgical. He took half of their assets, the house she once called too small, and something she didn't realize she was losing until it was gone, the respect of everyone they knew. Friends didn't choose sides loudly, they chose silently. Invitations stopped, conversations cooled. Her name became something people avoided explaining. The career. The marketing world is smaller than it pretends to be. When the Sims account, the largest and most visible client in the firm's history, disappeared overnight, the board didn't ask for nuance. They asked for a reason. The answer was easy. Jazmin was terminated for violating company policy, for unprofessional conduct, for creating a liability the firm couldn't afford. No farewell email, no defense of her work, no acknowledgement of the revenue she had brought in, just a revoked badge and a security escort. The blackball. She told herself she'd bounce back. She had experience, results, a name, but resumes went unanswered. Interviews were canceled without explanation. Rejections came too quickly to be coincidence. Alonzo Sims didn't need to destroy her publicly. He simply made one call. In a world built on relationships, his word carried more weight than her entire career. Doors closed before she reached them. In a matter of weeks, Jazmin went from a rising executive to a woman with no husband, no job, no references, and a bank account that shrank faster than her pride could process. The life she traded everything for vanished, and this time, there was no one left to blame. The studio apartment sat on the edge of a district people only visited when they had no other choice. It smelled of stale tobacco and industrial cleaner, a jarring contrast to the sandalwood and expensive jasmine that once permeated Jazmin's Tudor home. In her old life, Jazmin hated silence. She filled it with the hum of the television, the clinking of wine glasses, or the sound of her own voice listing everything she believed she lacked. But here, the silence was predatory. It sat in the corners of the room, watching her. Without the title of executive, without the status of wife, without the validation of a man like Alonzo Sims, Jazmin felt invisible. With terrifying clarity, she realized she had built her entire identity on things that could be taken away by an HR director or a divorce attorney. The first weeks passed in a strange state of mourning, not for her marriage, but for her reflection. She would stare into the cracked bathroom mirror and see a stranger looking back. The designer bags were gone, sold to a consignment shop for pennies on the dollar to cover the security deposit. The lifestyle Alonzo had promised revealed itself for what it was, a mirage. He hadn't just left her, he had erased her. One Tuesday night, the loneliness shifted from an ache into something sharper. She sat on the edge of a second-hand mattress, her only furniture besides a folding chair, and reached for her phone out of habit. Scrolling had always numbed her before. This time, it punished her. Photos of former colleagues at galas she once attended, smiling faces, champagne flutes raised. Then a blurry image of David at a community event, lighter somehow, freer. The weight of her choices pressed down on her chest until breathing felt optional. She had betrayed a good man for a shadow. She had traded integrity for access. She had exchanged her soul for a paycheck that had already been canceled. Jazmin slid off the bed and onto the cold linoleum floor. It was the first time she had been on her knees in years, and it wasn't to scrub a floor or retrieve a fallen earring. It was a collapse. God, she whispered, the word heavy and unfamiliar in her mouth. If you are there, I've made a mess. I ruined everything you gave me because I thought I knew better. I'm tired of being the god of my own life. I've failed at it. There was no voice, no vision, no dramatic interruption. Instead, there was something far more unsettling: honesty. She wept until her throat burned, confessing not just the affair, but the greed beneath it, the pride, the hunger, her makeup smeared, her tailored blazers replaced by a threadbare sweatshirt. Hours passed, and somewhere in that studio apartment, Jazmin finally reached the bottom. But for the first time, she understood something she had never allowed herself to believe. The bottom wasn't a grave, it was a foundation. The silence that once felt predatory now felt still. And in that stillness, she realized that while the world, the firm, and Alonzo Sims had all discarded her, the creator of the universe had not moved. He had waited for her to run out of things to buy, out of people to impress, out of lies to tell herself. He was the only friend she had left, and as it turned out, he was the only one she had ever needed to start over. Jazmin stayed on that floor longer than she intended. She cried out loud, not eloquently, not carefully, but honestly, asking God to help her make sense of her life, to show her how to live without destroying everything she touched, to fix what she had broken, even if the fixing didn't look the way she wanted. There were no immediate answers, just mornings that came anyway. The change didn't happen in a penthouse or a corner office. It happened in the quiet humiliation of the everyday. Jazmin found a job at a local diner, a place where the air smelled of grease instead of expensive perfume. For months, her hands, once soft from high-end lotions, grew rough from hot dishwater and heavy trays. There were days when the old Jazmin screamed to come back. One afternoon, a woman walked in wearing the same Prada heels Jazmin had once sold to pay her rent. For a moment, her heart burned with a familiar, bitter envy. She reached for her phone to look up Alonzo, to see what he was doing, to remind herself of the depths he promised. But she stopped. She put the phone down and walked to the back of the kitchen. She closed her eyes and prayed for the strength to want exactly where she was. She chose the grease over the glamour. She chose the truth over the image. It was the hardest work she had ever done, not building a brand, but building a soul. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. 3 months later, Jazmin found herself sitting in the back pew of a small church she had passed dozens of times without noticing. She began attending regularly, not to be seen, not to belong, but because it was the one place where she didn't feel the pressure to perform. Eventually, she volunteered, quietly, no leadership titles, no spotlight, just folding programs, helping with events, listening more than speaking. It was the first time in her adult life she wasn't climbing toward something. She was learning to stay. Around that same time, a letter arrived. Her grandmother had passed, a woman Jazmin had loved but rarely made time for once her career accelerated. Inside the envelope was a modest inheritance, $50,000. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to start small, enough to begin again. Jazmin didn't rush this time. She prayed. She asked God what to do with it, something she had never done with money before. She started a small marketing business from her apartment. No glossy launch, no expensive branding, just honest work, built slowly. The first 2 months brought 2 accounts. She celebrated both. Then came 2 accounts a week. Not overnight success, but steady growth. For the first time, prosperity felt different, not intoxicating, entrusting. A year passed. One afternoon, she ran into Muriel, a mutual friend of hers and David's, at a coffee shop. They exchanged polite smiles, the kind that carried history without inviting it. Muriel hesitated, then spoke. "David's engaged," she said gently. "He met his fiancée at the grocery store, of all places. She's an accountant too, very grounded." She smiled. "He got promoted last quarter. He's doing really well. He seems happy." Jazmin nodded. At first, she said nothing. Then she smiled, a practiced smile, and said she was happy for him. And she meant it, mostly. Muriel asked about her life. Jazmin said she was doing well too, that she'd found love again. It wasn't entirely a lie. She had found God. And for now, that was enough. Later, alone in her car, Jazmin sat quietly with the ache. Not jealousy, but grief. The kind that comes when you finally understand what you lost after you've changed enough to keep it. 3 more months passed. It was a new season, literally and spiritually. Her business continued to grow. She moved from her home office into a small leased suite. Nothing flashy, just clean, bright, and hers. She hired an assistant. She paid bills on time. She slept peacefully. One afternoon, while running errands during lunch, Jazmin stopped at the dry cleaners, and there he was, David. Their eyes met. Neither spoke at first. Time pressed gently between them. Hi, Jazz, he finally said. Hi, David. They stood in silence, no anger, no bitterness. Just the quiet recognition of two people who had survived different versions of the same story. I heard you're engaged, Yasmin said. He smiled. Married, actually. We just got back from our honeymoon. She nodded. Congratulations. We spent 2 weeks in Paris, he added, almost apologetically. Paris, the place Yasmin once demanded instead of camping trips and national parks. The irony didn't sting the way she expected it to. I'm glad, she said, and this time she truly was. They said goodbye simply. No promises, no closure speeches, no lingering looks, just peace. As Yasmin walked back to her car, she realized something quietly profound. God hadn't restored her old life. He had given her a better one, not louder, not richer, but rooted. She no longer needed power, money, or a man to feel whole. She had learned the hardest lesson last. Everything she once chased was meant to be a gift, not a god. And now, finally, she was free. Yasmin used to believe that success meant elevation. Bigger rooms, bigger names, bigger applause. She thought peace came after achievement, that once she arrived, everything inside her would finally quiet down. She was wrong. God didn't give her back the life she lost. He gave her clarity. The ambition didn't disappear. It was redeemed, redirected, placed under something stronger than ego. She still worked hard, still built carefully, but now her life wasn't fueled by comparison or hunger. It was guided by obedience. She no longer asked, "What do I deserve?" She asked, "What have I been trusted with?" The life she once chased would have destroyed the woman she's become, and the woman she is now wouldn't trade her peace for any version of success that required her to lose herself again. Grace didn't return her to the top. It taught her how to live without needing it. And for the first time, Yasmin understood the difference between having everything and being whole. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever chased more and found yourself emptier, you're not alone. Subscribe, like, or leave a comment if this spoke to you. Sometimes the fall isn't the end, it's the invitation.